to welcome you here tonight. My name is Daniel Berger, and I'm the Chief Executive of Magen Adom here in the UK. And that's perfect timing. Just as I started talking, people are screaming outside. You could not make this up. Anyway, it's lovely to see so many friends joining us online. And it's an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this Facebook Live and YouTube Live video with Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. In a moment, Stephen will introduce Fleur, but if I may just take a moment of your time to tell you something about Magen Adom. Hopefully, most of you on this know who we are, but for those of you who don't, Magen Adom is Israel's National Red Cross Society. It is the National Medical Service of Israel. If you call 101, the ambulance number, it is MDA at the end of the phone. And if you called 101, particularly during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic in Israel, you would get 101. Magen Adom was absolutely central and key to handling the corona pandemic. And I can just tell you an interesting statistic that instead of a typical 5,500 call volume per day, one day in April, the calls peaked at over 200,000. It's an absolutely enormous amounts of calls. And here are the people helping save lives in Israel. Very briefly, Magen Adom is also the blood services of Israel, collecting over 98% of Israel's blood supplies. And one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about is, as I said a little bit earlier, it is the National Red Cross Society of Israel, meaning that it works on both a humanitarian level, on an international and a domestic stage. It's a phenomenal organization, and I'm very proud to be representing this organization. So without further ado, I wanted to thank you again for joining us, and I can see people are joining from all around the country. We've got the East Midlands and Bangor coming online, as well as London. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Stephen Jaffe. Stephen is known to many of you around the country, and he is an amazing advocate for the Jewish community, and he's a fantastic, staunch supporter of Magen Adom, and I'm proud to call him a very active member of our team and a friend. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a huge honor to be asked to introduce Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. I had the honor of accompanying Fleur on a visit she made to Northern Ireland, it's a couple of years ago. And she's an outstanding ambassador and spokesperson for the city of Jerusalem. She is a champion for Jerusalem. She's very much engaged in all the issues of a modern city in terms of the pluralism of Jerusalem, the coexistence of so many different disparate groups. But she also, and this really struck me when I met you, Fleur, was you have such a strong sense of Jerusalem's significance for millions and millions on our planet who look to Jerusalem as a focus for their prayers and for their pilgrimage visits. Fleur grew up in Gibraltar. She was educated. She did a law degree in London, practiced as a barrister in the UK before making Aliyah to Israel in 2001. And she became immediately very much involved in Israeli society, charitable work. She's a communications advisor to many Israeli companies. In 2016, Fleur became a city councillor for Jerusalem. And as deputy mayor of the city, she has special responsibility for foreign relations, economic development, and tourism. And I know, Fleur, that so many people in the UK are missing the ability to visit the city of Jerusalem. We want to know what's been happening in the city during the lockdown. I'm sure that the lives of many of its citizens have been very adversely affected. We want to know when we can visit again. So over to you, Fleur, and very much looking forward to what you're going to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Daniel, and Racheli for organizing it. It's wonderful for me to be talking to MDA because Magen Adom in Israel, like Daniel said, it really is our medical lifeline to anything that we need in an emergency situation or otherwise. and Jerusalem has gone through a very difficult time during the corona, and Magen David Adom still is the body that is helping us get through this on a medical and emergency level. So that's the first thing I wanted to so I want to talk a little bit about Jerusalem, and I want to talk a little bit about what we've been going through, what our challenges are, where the opportunities are, and how it is that we've managed to really get through the most challenging times of a long time that I can remember. So I'll start a little bit with the demography of Jerusalem and why this poses its specific challenges. So Jerusalem is actually the most diverse city in the country. It's also the largest city in the country by quite a lot. And unfortunately, it's socioeconomically the most challenging city in the country. We have 37% Arab residents, we have 25% ultra-Orthodox residents, and then the rest is a mixture of secular and modern religious, and it comes with its own challenges because two of these populations are socioeconomically very challenged, and that is the Arab population and the ultra-Orthodox population, where we have multiple members of the family and very, very low workforce participation. And this is something that is ongoing. We're trying to evolve, and we have results in both these communities for all the work that we're trying to do with them. But that's just the general challenges that Jerusalem has. I'm going to talk about what happened to us at the beginning of the crisis and how it is that we've managed to manage the crisis. At the beginning of the crisis, what we had was a huge issue with the ultra-Orthodox community. Unfortunately, the leaders were not as forthcoming with leading their flock to keeping to the social distances and ultimately also to the lockdown. There are multiple reasons. Eventually they did when they realized how serious it was, but at the beginning there was this feeling that somehow we were going to be okay. And so what happened was that Jerusalem, because of the largest population that we have here, which is the ultra-Orthodox community in the country, Jerusalem became the hot spot for the corona spread, mainly amongst ultra-Orthodox communities. And so ultra-Orthodox communities live in their own neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods at some point, so we saw more than 1 in 1,000 cases of corona, and we had to, instead of closing the whole city, which was something which would have been very, very difficult, challenging to do, what we decided to do is to split the city into different neighborhoods and then decide what we were going to do to contain each neighborhood. And so we started with the neighborhoods. It was a mathematical formula for us, no more than that. Any neighborhood that had more than 1 in 1,000 cases of corona were neighborhoods that we considered red neighborhoods, and we shut them down. And what happens is, and I think this is what happened to Jews all around the world, Jewish communities are very communal, and so we gather. And because of that, because of the fact that we continuously gather, the virus was able to spread. Now, in the ultra-Orthodox community, not only do people gather much more than the rest of the communities, but they also live in tiny accommodation with many children. And so what happened was that we're in a situation where one family member you certainly couldn't put him on or her on isolation because they're living in very close, crammed, crowded quarters. And so it's spread amongst families, it's spread amongst overpopulated building, streets and neighborhoods in the ultra-Orthodox community. And that was really the principal challenge that we had. So the mayor of Jerusalem actually was very smart, Mayor Moshe Leon, and he decided to, the first priority was to separate the sick people from the healthy people. And the only way you could do that in these type of neighborhoods was to get people who were sick out of the homes that they were in. And what we did was we opened up corona hotels, which sounds a bit of an oxymoron, but the people who were sick enough to go to hospital were in hospital. But the people who weren't that sick, that we needed to separate the healthy from the sick, we set up a command center in 5 different languages to call people and convince them to leave their houses in order to go to these Corona hotels. And of course, Magen Adom came in with us to remove the sick people from the healthy family members or environment or neighborhood and put them in these Corona hotels where they would get para-hospital services, but mainly just be able to be isolated for a couple of weeks until they got over. So that's the first thing we did for health purposes. The second thing that was crucial was to start mass testing. And again, I think it was a very smart, novel idea. Magen Adom innovated this thing called the drive-in test center. And so because they didn't want people to get out of their cars, and because they didn't want people to be walking around, we opened one of the largest in the country, drive-in test center, where you drive in with your car, you get tested in your car, and then you just move on, like if you're going to a drive-in burger place. And this was a way that we could keep people still isolated, but tested. And again, we opened up a center in the southwest part of the city, and then within a short week, we opened up a test center in the Arab neighborhoods. And these centers were basically a lifeline to understanding what the scope of the problem was in Jerusalem. So that's what we did on the health front. Secondly, on the humanitarian front, we were facing a very, very challenging situation that basically, as I mentioned earlier, we have the ultra-Orthodox community, we have also the Arab community, and of course we have the rest of the different communities. Jerusalem is a poor city. And so what we had was that mass unemployment. It's actually incredible. We went from the lowest ever unemployment figure that we've ever had in the history of the state of Israel to the highest in a few short weeks. 30% of our economy is based on tourism. It's based on tourism, direct businesses that are directly servicing tourism, like hotels, and then the indirect businesses like restaurants and bars and ice cream shops. So in the first few weeks, when the lockdown was announced, we had a collapse of the backbone of small businesses in the city. And so we had a humanitarian crisis on our hands. So we did 2 things in the city. We, first of all, created a task force for volunteer organizations. We have lots of different volunteers organizations in the city. In fact, Israel has got the largest number of nonprofit organizations per capita than anywhere in the world, and Jerusalem has the highest in the country. And so it's safe to say Jerusalem has the highest NGOs per capita in the world. And what we did was create a task force of the organizations that are directly managing and in charge of volunteers. We had organizations in charge of Holocaust survivors. We had organizations in charge of younger people, special needs families. There's lots of different organizations that have an army of volunteers. And so we actually created a coordinated strategy. And we decided a few things. One is that there was not going to be any lonely elderly person who wasn't going to have a point person taking care of their needs. Now, of course, they couldn't visit them or they couldn't be with them, but they could be the person, they could be their advocate, whether they needed medicines or whether they needed food or more food or dry food or prepared food, whether they just needed to talk to somebody and feel less lonely. We organized an amazing army of 15,000 volunteers. We have around 70,000 needy elderly in the city, and we reached out to everybody who needed help. In the end, we ended up helping almost 20,000 people 3 times a week, not just volunteers being in touch with them every day, but bringing them hot meals, prepared meals 3 times a week, 17,000 people. So that was an enormous operation. We also, of course, did dry food packages. We had a specific issue with special needs families, the 6,000 special needs families, and it was actually very, very challenging for them because normally these families who have a special needs child has normally that child in some type of educational framework till 6 o'clock in the evening. These are very challenging kids, very, a big strain for the parents. And so all of a sudden everybody was home. And so we assigned volunteers also for special needs families. And also we distributed educational toys so that these families would have something to do with these kids who would normally be in a very professional framework until 6 o'clock every night. So that was basically the humanitarian assistance that we provided. And honestly, the people there was such a strong sense of unity. And there was such a strong sense of solidarity between the different groups in the city. And people here were, just dying to get out and volunteer and offer themselves to anything that was needed. And I think the best thing to come out of the corona for me, there's a few good things to come out from the humanitarian work that we did. One thing is we are now in touch with more elderly people that are now in our system that we ever knew that we could reach. And that is thanks to what happened. And what we are trying to do is keep the volunteer services for these elderly people now in times with the easing of restrictions, because they're still vulnerable to leave the house. And they're still lonely, the ones that live on their own. And so we have created now a continuum of services for these elderly people that a lot of them we discovered that weren't on our radar. The second positive thing to come out of it is that, Jerusalem, as I said earlier, is a challenging city, diverse city with lots of different populations. And now we have, we created an incredible unified strategy with the Arab community of Jerusalem. And we really worked very closely with all the different leaders from the Arab communities. We did a special operation just before the Ramadan with food vouchers and food packages, because people couldn't come out and stock up. And of course, the needy people, didn't have the means. And so we also distributed 20,000 food vouchers and packages before the Ramadan so that people wouldn't feel panicked about what it means to them, for the Muslim community. And so I think that the best thing to come out of it, again, is sort of be much more in touch with the grassroots and be much more unified as a city, and a city which is sometimes characterized for its divisions. And I'm very proud to say that we came out of the corona characterized for our unity and unity of purpose, and the fact that we all came together against one enemy and worked together to defeat that enemy, which was, of course, the virus. That's on the humanitarian level. Now, on the business level, unfortunately, and the economic level, we're suffering very, very much till today. I hold a tourism portfolio, and I'm also in charge of economic development. I'm not in charge of small businesses, but I'm in charge of economic development. And it's really devastating what we have at the moment. We've been, we've got, like I said, high unemployment rate, 30% probably. We have businesses that have gone under, small businesses. We have no tourists, which, like I said earlier, is a huge chunk of our income. And what the first thing the city did, our Department for Business Development, for small business development, we created an online mall for all Jerusalem businesses. It's called J Mall. And basically, we try to move all small businesses onto one unified platform. We offered services to all the small businesses of Jerusalem to create for them a free website with no costs and no fees. And so we actually created the services. Again, we did this through volunteers. We took volunteers, students, engineering students from the Hebrew University, and we activated them to become volunteers for businesses that are seeking to create an online presence. We created this mall. We connected small businesses to government loans without fees, again, with quick acceptance levels. We've also partners in a small fund to help businesses both with loans and grants in order to pivot perhaps into more technological areas. And so that's what we've been doing with small businesses. For tourism, what I'm trying to do now is, we have 0 tourists coming in the summer because the skies are closed, unfortunately. So we're doing a number of things. The first thing I'm trying to do is to encourage the 4 million Israelis that normally travel every summer, to encourage them to come to Jerusalem. I think that religious people are more connected to Jerusalem in Israel, unfortunately, than non-religious people. And so I'm putting a campaign together that shows people that Jerusalem is a city, not just a holy city, but it's also a city which is a lot of fun for children, which has an incredible diverse culture, and outstanding, the best culinary experience in the country, different layers of history, every corner you take. And so we are doing a widespread campaign for Israelis to come, trying to also work with the hotel industry to try and get decent discounts and encourage packages of families coming to Jerusalem this summer, because we somehow need to keep these businesses afloat. And local tourism, unfortunately, was only 20% of our tourist market. Just in comparison, a city like Eilat has 80% local tourism and 20% foreign tourism. We're the opposite of Eilat. We have 80% foreign tourism and 20% local tourism, and we have to do everything that we can this summer to double the local tourism to at least 40%, so we can help businesses just float by, because that's all that's going to happen until the skies open up again. And so that's what we're trying to do with the tourism industry. And again, we have an unprecedented situation because, every time Jerusalem is no stranger to crises. We've had wars, we've had 2 intifadas, we had one 5 years ago, quite recently, the knife intifada. So we're no stranger to situations of emergency. The difference is that, this is the first time that the whole world is facing similar challenges. And so being closed off, being an international city, a city that is, not just the capital of the state of Israel, but the capital of Jewish people around the world, a holy city for Christians of all kinds, and all different types of people around the world who look at Jerusalem as the center of the spiritual world. It's very difficult for us to face a situation when people can't come. Even if they want to come, people can't come. And that we're kind of closed in. And that's something that this is a challenge that we're going to have to find creative solutions. In my own strategy, I would love to make Jerusalem into the model post-corona city of tourism by implementing stricter hygiene standards, crowd control standards, to create, through our technology. Jerusalem has incredibly innovative technology. We're a city of technology since King David decided that Jerusalem would be the capital city of his kingdom, and a few years later, his son decided to build a much grander temple. We were always technologically advanced. The stone cutting, the way buildings were put together, the way the temple was put together, was something that everybody came to see. And so we still have this DNA of innovation. And today we have a different challenge. And the challenge is how to use that innovation, how to use the ingenuity that comes from necessity in order to create a better reality for the day after Corona. And in tourism, I truly believe with the innovations that I've been exploring, for example, somebody who's created an app so you have zero contact with any hotel staff, because you can check in on your app and you can order room service on your app, and you can order outside restaurant food on your app, and anything you need, and even a key is on your app, to startups that are creating innovative ways of doing touring around the city so that the crowds don't meet different crowds and there's number control, and different types of hygiene standards and materials, So I would like, we've managed in Jerusalem to get out of the crisis more or less. Israel, unfortunately, in the last week or so has fallen back into it, but I'm happy to say not Jerusalem. We've gone from the highest corona city to somewhere in the middle of the list, which is a good thing. And so now looking forward, we have to look at ways to position ourselves as the city which is the safest to visit. And of course, the most beautiful to visit, we already knew. And so the safest to visit and restore, the most important thing is to restore the confidence of travelers. And people are really, I know people are really dying to get back to Jerusalem. The question that I've been asked again and again is when can foreigners come? And I would lie if I knew the answer, or I told you I know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer, not even the Prime Minister. I think it's a question of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We would have hoped that by now we would have been in a position to create at least flying, air bridges with the countries that have been less affected by Corona. But unfortunately, we kind of fell off that list when we started rising again in numbers in the last few weeks. And so for the moment we're here, we're trying to make the best of a very difficult situation. And we are trying to prepare for the day after when we can hopefully welcome everybody back to our city. And again, I want to say that the first line of defense in this crisis wasn't the army, it was Magen Adom. And it's something that we don't take for granted. We're very, very lucky that the expertise that they've developed has been easily applicable and pivoted to the current crisis, which is unprecedented in the world. Nobody's faced this since, the Black Plague, to the Spanish flu. But then now we have that answer because Magen Adom not only has the capacity, it also has the different methods and innovations in order to be able to deal with this type of crisis. And that knowledge sharing is a very important part of their work as well. In Israel, we believe, in Jerusalem especially, the old expression, Mitzion Titzeh Torah, from Zion, you will have Torah. Torah is any type of learning. And so the experience and the know-how that we've developed, the best practices that we've developed during this crisis is something that I spend a great deal of time sharing with different people around the world. And of course, the expertise of Magen Adom is something that here in the city and of course in the country, we're extremely proud of and extremely grateful for. And so I've given you kind of a summary of where we're at, how we got through this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has for me.
Hi, hello, Fleur. Thank you so much. It was fascinating, really amazing. And I'm just on a personal level, I'm so sorry we can't be there in Israel with you. This is probably the longest period of time I haven't been in Israel. I've had numerous cancelled trips this year, both for business and with the family at Pesach. And I think we're all struggling to come to terms with it, particularly those in Israel. But this, of course, is a worldwide pandemic. And as the UK government today is talking about where it's going to open its first air bridges with, I know it's very topical. I know everyone's list, and when I go through the chat box and some of the Q&A coming in, you've answered the question about none of us have that crystal ball, none of us can see when. I wish we could. Lots of people have been asking, what can they do to help boost the Israeli and the Jerusalem, particularly economy? What can we and Brits or other people in the diaspora do to help?
Well, I can give you the website of the J Mall, which is the small businesses that we put online. If I'm not wrong, they were translating it, which would help. They didn't think about it until I said to them, maybe people from abroad actually want to buy things from Jerusalem. So I'll send you the website, and you're all welcome to buy whatever you like from the Holy City. And of course, I don't have to say that that the work that Magen Adom does is possible largely due to the donations that they get from around the world. So helping Magen Adom helps us all.
I couldn't agree more. And it's a real challenge. Our donors are really missing not being there. And we're hoping and praying that by Sukkot, we can start coming back. Is that?
I hope I will be able to receive you in City Hall.
Oh, I will hold you to that. Thank you. Moving on from tourism, and I'm sure Mark, Reverend Madeley, who's on the panel with us, will come back to that. But I have been asked another question about Israel. Everyone knows Israel is leading the world in its medical science and innovation. But is there anything they could have done differently earlier in terms of fighting COVID?
Yeah, I want to say that Israel is leading. I think there's a race at the moment about who's going to get the first vaccine, which is fantastic, because that's what makes people actually succeed when there's a bit of competition. Jerusalem's actually got a very strong biotech cluster, a niche, because of Hadassah Hospital, which is a university research hospital, and it's a real hospital as well. So it's a fantastic place. We've been very strong here in diagnostics in Jerusalem. So the best diagnostic technology coming out of Israel at the moment is coming out from here. And I mean, there's lots of things we could have done differently, I think. But I think that in general, we didn't do so badly. I think that the smartest thing that happened here was the fact that we did close our borders early. I can't stress that enough, That was a decision of the Prime Minister, and I think he was absolutely right. We implemented isolation times before anybody. Apart from China, we did the lockdown before any European country. And so I think that we kind of were a couple of steps ahead at every given moment. I want to say, and I've said this before, people are like, why are you guys so ready? Unfortunately, living in a country surrounded by either enemies or very cold friends, we are very, very good with emergency preparedness because we've had to be. And so that preparedness and B, resilience has actually puts us in a good stead, because we really know how to mobilize emergency services, troops, and even the army. Just a little thing, my husband is a dentist. He's also from the UK. He trained in Guy's Hospital. He had to shut down his clinic, but he's also a major in the Israeli reserve, in the IDF Israeli reserves. And because, he's a dentist, he got given a medical role in the Home Front Command, working in a hospital. So Israel is a country that can mobilize 1 million soldiers through its reserve system. And so, like I said, I wish it wasn't the case, but we are prepared at every given moment. And this is what's helped us get through it. I think that for me, the thing that could have been done better, I think, is and I blame the ultra-Orthodox leaders. Somehow the religious communities thought that God was going to protect them with some special shield of faith. And as we know, the virus doesn't discriminate race, religion, or religious affiliation. And I believe that the ultra-Orthodox leadership could have reacted a little bit earlier. The Muslim leadership actually reacted much earlier, I have to say, and shut down the Temple Mount, which gathers 5,000 worshippers every Friday. So they shut down, and they kept shut down for the Ramadan, which wasn't easy for them. And our ultra-Orthodox leaders were a little slow to start with, but now I have to say that the ultra-Orthodox community, rabbis are coming out saying, you don't wear a mask, you are putting people's lives at risk. And so they've caught up, and they're now being very, very responsible. And what we see is now in Israel is that the secular public, especially around Tel Aviv, the younger generation is saying, oh, we don't need this, we're okay, we're young, we even if we get it, we're not in danger. And unfortunately, this attitude is now what's putting us in danger. And so I guess compliance, which is always difficult, and just better leadership amongst different types of communities, especially more traditional communities, is what I think we could have done differently. I think mass testing is begun. We were always testing, but mass testing has begun in the last few weeks. Again, we weren't ready enough to do the mass testing from the beginning. It took us a while to find our feet. But I honestly think that of all the countries, Israel, for the reasons that I already mentioned, has done quite well. And I think the one thing that I want to say, which I'm very proud of, is that you hear all around the world all these things like herd immunity, and so the older people will die. So in Israel, I have to say, a life is a life is a life. And the medical services will fight for an 85-year-old in the same way that they will fight for a 35-year-old, because for us, a life is a life, and older people are not less valuable to our country. And so herd immunity could never have worked here because the public would just not have stood for it. Here we value our elderly community. These are the people who created the country, who fought for the country, who lost family members for the country, Holocaust survivors, people who we owe the very existence of this country to. And there was no way that we were going to take a ventilator of an older person to give it to a younger person. And so we did everything we could so we would never get to that situation. I have to just mention one beautiful initiative during the Passover, when we realized that so many people were going to be doing, for the first time in their lives possibly, the Passover Seder on their own. So a friend of mine who had a fantastic idea that we should all come out at the same time, the whole country come out at the same time and sing Manishtana, which is one of our, one of the top 10 tunes of that night. And so that people who are on their own at home can open a window and not feel on their own and feel like they're part of one mass Passover Seder. And I did it with my family, and it was just so moving to be able to shout it out literally from the rooftops, so that even one or two people who are on their own would not feel on their own. And so there's so much social innovation here, medical innovation here, that overall I feel very grateful and proud to be part of the government here.
Thank you. And you're right, there is so much. Just wanted to focus on the local economy for a moment, because this gives me an opportunity for a shameless plug for Magen David Adom.
I think I did one too.
Absolutely. We're building a new blood center, protected blood center, 17 meters underground in Ramla, near Lod, central Israel, near to the airport. For those of you who don't know, the project is costing $120 million. And now we've raised now with the American Friends of MDA and the government of Israel, so far we've raised over $90 million, but there's still a way to go. And what gets me thinking about this is we're literally in the very early stages of launching a really exciting campaign, a mezuzah campaign, where you can sponsor a mezuzah for a door in a room in the project. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because we've decided that rather than go to one of the large companies and buy mass-produced mezuzot, we're going to go to local artists, boost the economy. We're going to ask and hopefully commission a very exclusive mezuzah. And so when you're asking on this chat box how you can boost the economy, you can do it through boosting the economy for a local student and a small business, and also raising vital funds for Magen David Adom. So a win-win. I'm just having a look through the questions. One more. No, the blood center, I should say, will be opening in a year's time. The aim is to have it open in just over a year, and I cannot wait to be able to go through that. And I was there in March, and just before lockdown, actually, and I was able to walk through the building for the very first time, and it's very, very exciting. So your support has really helped. So thank you, one and all, on this call for everything you're doing for us. If there's no more questions, what I'd like to do is introduce you to another very special person involved with Magen David Adom UK, and that is the Reverend Mark Madeley. Mark, you are there. Hello. I'd like to congratulate Mark on his very recent appointment as Vice President of Magen David Adom UK. Mark has been President of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom UK since 2006. And through him and his committee have raised over £1 million from their Christian supporters, or our Christian supporters, for a variety of projects, and are well on their way to raising a new bloodmobile now, which I believe will be based in Jerusalem. Mark is an amazing person, and he also has a vested interest in tourism as he runs pilgrimages and other trips to Israel. So I thought, let me introduce you our newest Mr. Vice President, and Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. Good evening, everyone. Deputy Mayor, it's been a real privilege to listen to you. I've been watching the live comments as you spoke, and they were firing in left, right, and centre about what a wonderful speaker you are and what a good ambassador you are for Israel. And that was certainly my opinion. It's been really fantastic. I was fascinated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I was fascinated to learn about the particular problems Jerusalem faced with the tight-knit communities and the different types of communities. I was less surprised to hear how good you were at responding, because many of us just take our hats off to Israel because you always seem to be getting everything right where we just seem to stand and watch sometimes. So, well done for what you have done. And I'm not surprised to hear that things are under control and still are. It's sad to hear that unemployment has raised so much. That really is sad. Speaking as a tour operator, as someone who loves Israel passionately, I've lost count of how many times I've been. My friends say, and it's true of me, our hearts are breaking with desperation to get back in the land, to be with you again, and to support you. And as the Christians, we do pray for you every day, that for your protection, not just from Corona, but from everything else going on around Israel. And it's an absolute promise from us. We will be back as soon as the skies open. I'm ready to press book on El Al as soon as it starts. So, we are with you in spirit if we cannot yet be with you in person.
Thank you.
But thank you so much.
Thank you. When you come, then I'd love you to visit me in City Hall, and we'll show you around. It would be
Thank you. I'd do that with pleasure. I was quite hoping you would invite us. When you said to Daniel earlier, I thought, I hope I get the same invite. So thank you.
You're going to get a better one, Mark, I promise.
Just in closing, I am passionate about MDA. It's one of the things I love the most. And I think, Daniel, if you've not given a plug, I would have done. So again, I'm going to be bold enough to say, please support Magen Adom. It's a fantastic organisation. We can learn from it. We need to support it just to see, the way in which they can then lead us in other technology around the world. So all the best to you, Fleur. I know it's late in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you every blessing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend.
Be well and stay safe, everybody. And thank you all also for coming and joining us.